Depends on how you describe works, but all right, I think we're live.
We're live on YouTube too?
We're live on YouTube. Wait, inappropriate messages, hold potentially inappropriate messages for review. Oh, no, fuck
that. Comment away. All right, welcome to the Thunk Tank.
Yeah, welcome back. It's been
we think this is our first live video stream. We're not sure if we're doing it correctly or not.
Are you recording?
No.
Okay, cool.
So, 1 second, folks. I'm going to actually hit record.
Wait, we need beer first.
That's fine. All right, we're officially recording the podcast. It's been a while since we've done Thunk Tank.
We've had a lot of summer hijinks going on, but good hijinks.
If you're watching us on Instagram, like you people,
who's watching us? Somebody's watching.
Go
us.
over to YouTube. We have a live stream on YouTube with like our soundboard audio.
Yeah,
I think.
We think plausibly.
Joe, while I get our first beer going, can you explain to the fine Thunk Tank viewers why I'm in a frog suit?
Oh, yeah. So shout out to Duluth Atheist, right? For providing us with this very lovely Luke frog suit. Very long story short, we had a few beers one episode. I think it was just that one episode.
Yeah, it was just a few beers. That's it.
Yeah, we just had a few beers, and Luke may or may not have mentioned that he would wear a frog suit if somebody donated one, and lo and behold,
somebody donated
a frog suit, and here we are.
And I thought it an appropriate outfit for our episode on environmentalism and pollution and all that.
Yeah, that was planned ahead of time.
You know, I support frogs.
Yeah, frogs are important. I've done some research.
A few lessons learned. One is that I will be way more careful about what I say and the promises I make.
That's first and foremost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, you guys can actually now see the beer that we're drinking. So
that's very exciting. Yeah.
If you're watching on YouTube, by the way, let us know if the audio sounds good. We're not totally sure.
Nobody's watching on YouTube.
That's fine. But
that might be for the best.
We'll find out if, you know, like,
it says
we set things up properly or whatever.
God, we're such Luddites.
Like, what happens if you hit that microphone, Joe?
Oh, is it not on?
I don't know. I'm just making sure. Now's the time to figure it out.
Okay.
No, yeah, that one. Oh, that's mute. Don't hit that.
Yeah, no, that would be bad to hit.
All right. Anyways,
for the whole thing. Well, we can cut around this in post. Any technical.
There is no post. It's live.
Oh shit, you're right. Yeah, but nobody's watching, so we'll.
So I'm cracking a Julius. Just took a recent visit up to Treehouse in Massachusetts.
Would you say you hopped on up there?
Yep.
Yep, it's begun. And let the beer pour begin.
So yeah.
How'd you like your trip up there? What do you have to say to the good people at Treehouse?
It was easier than ever compared to like in the past where you had to wait on insane lines. You know, maybe for like their most epic releases on a Saturday, you're still going to have to deal with getting there really early and waiting on the line and all that stuff.
That's true for a lot of places.
But yeah, that's of course. But I'm saying like their operation has gotten so big that like the past 2 times I went there was on a Thursday, and I got there at like 4. They open at 12, and they still had cans of every beer that they were offering. You know, I wasn't really in on Treehouse on the early days, so I can't say as to like whether the quality's changed at all from like their original days to like now kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Are you taste testing?
It's good.
It's good.
It's good.
So if you haven't tried Treehouse, definitely if you get a chance, try it. I think it's one of the best breweries out there for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, they have such a unique like flavor profile for some of their beers. Like the green, I think we both agree is probably one of our favorite beers, right?
I would say so.
That would have been so appropriate if you had gotten green.
Fuck yeah, they didn't have green.
Of course they didn't. It's one of the best beers I think in history.
I just mean they only release, you know, what they happen to release.
Please send us cases.
That Julius was canned yesterday, for example.
This is pretty good Julius.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cold, very fresh.
Yeah.
So we'll announce a few other beers as we crack them.
Yeah, we'll be going through
several
beers.
Ow.
I don't know. I think your frog antennae are interfering.
Interfering.
With the wires.
That's probably my phone.
Oh yeah, get that out of here.
So Joe, why don't you introduce today's topic? If you're watching this on YouTube, we usually put some kind of intro on our normal episodes. So
do we? Yeah.
I don't think the YouTube version will have that.
How would we?
However that works. So, Joe, just give a quick what are we talking about today? We're going to try and do it in a part 1, part 2.
Yeah.
Johnny's going to be able to join us for part 2.
He better join us for part 2 because it's not the same without that crazy genie man.
It's also been a while. Apologies to you Thunk Tank listeners. It's been a while since we even
had an episode.
Like we're talking weeks probably, right?
Yeah. Well, we've all had our summer. So I was at a writers conference doing professional development, which is really just drinking, but also professional development. So yeah, we've been sort of busy, but we're back. We're drinking, we're green, and I think we're good to go. So today's episode, we wanted to talk about a little bit about pollution, and not just pollution is sort of what you hear in the news of just, I guess, politicized issues of pollution, but I think it's important to think about the larger historical context of pollution, right? And sort of look at how we've gotten to where we are today in terms of the effects of pollution in a sort of globalized sense, starting with historically, and then of course how much things changed in the industrial era, and how in a lot of senses we haven't, I don't know if recovered is the right word for that, but I feel like that is sort of an appropriate word, how we haven't quite recovered from just the change in the impacts that pollution has both locally and now much more globally. So
it's one of those problems that it can't be like one country fixing it,
Well, it's not even close to that.
Like World War II, it's like, figure out what that is exactly. World War II was like, maybe it's the frog suit, dude.
I think your frog suit is interfering.
World War II was one of those things that if the U.S. didn't go enter the war, we maybe would be looking at a different world, and that was something where a country single-handedly could do a gigantic thing. Now, of course, you could do stuff with pollution and in a way lead by example, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But unless you get China and India and these giant polluters, the most polluted cities in the world are in countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and China.
It's
funny you mentioned World War II as well, because I read an article once about how there was a period during World War II where there was such a shutdown of the fishing industry because it was so dangerous, because all the countries are at war, you can't just go out fishing, that there was actually a boom in fish populations.
Oh,
because people just weren't fishing as much.
Did you talk about that on our oceans episode by chance?
Who knows? But but it would be appropriate because it's that says something about the utterly devastating impact that humans, even when they're just fishing, have on the environment, right?
Now, fair enough. There's an extent to which you can't hate on the fact that we have an impact on the environment.
Well, everything has an impact.
Everything has an impact on the environment, and surviving itself means that, take any other species on Earth, if they could, they would just dominate and do exactly what we're doing, and probably do it in even less mindful a way.
And they do within their own realms, right?
Within their niches.
Within what they think the world is,
right,
or the universe is. Some of them...
Rabbits don't have school classes where they tell each other, stop fucking because we have too many... We're overpopulated and we won't be able to feed our children.
And maybe that's why aliens don't give a fuck about us, because...
We're like rabbits.
Yeah, we're like rabbits to them. It's why would we care what's going on Earth?
Well,
that's not even in our dimension.
Population is one of the environmental factors, right? Because if we didn't have so many people, we wouldn't have so many problems.
I'm
not saying we should have less people, but it's just obviously a factor.
But that's actually a great point too, because I've seen that, especially in recent years, get become, again, it always seems to just become politicized, and it evolves into kind of just political bickering. And somebody mentioned that.
Yeah, everything gets politicized. It's what the fuck?
Somebody mentioned, I saw online about how the fact that the way things are structured now in terms of food supply and resource supply globally, there's just too many people, right? If you want to be able to feed everybody on planet Earth who exists now, and support them with resources that you need to live in a modern society, there's really just not enough production right now. So it's you have to look at that and say, what is the solution to that? And if the solution is the fact that, well, we need to stop, we can't keep exponentially making people, then people come back and say, well, what are you saying? kill all these
Right.
people, and it's like, well, no, but if you just look at statistically
So
how that breaks down,
the
it is an
famous,
issue over
I think,
population.
Pope something Malthus, Malthus. I thought he was a pope.
Yeah,
but
great guy.
They even say like he was involved in like the early environmentalism idea, but with his famous quote which says, "Don't bother feeding the poor because there'll be more of them tomorrow." And
that's an age-old axiom, right? Teach a man to fish. No, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for life.
That's not the same at all. The teach a man to fish, feed a man to fish thing is saying like, don't just. Am I just yelling too much?
I think you're yelling too much.
Is saying don't just.
Which is scary because you're not really yelling.
Don't just.
Yeah, but
Okay, that's better.
My point is, if you teach all the poor people how to fish, then fuck you. That's where that analogy breaks
Well,
down.
the teaching someone to do something just means like, oh, they'll actually have the tools to like, take care of themselves instead of always having to come to you for a fish. But
there's not even enough clean water in the world for everybody, is there?
And the point is like population's growing at such a rate that as soon as you solve the problem for 7 billion people, now there's 9.
Well,
then you solve it for 9, and there's 11.
And the problem too is that if you solve, say a problem like different types of diseases, it's like great. That's what was killing so many people, especially people like you say who are maybe poorer. But that doesn't mean that all those other resources that people need to live and then thrive are still available to them. It's like you solved one issue that was keeping populations down, but now have you solved access to water, access to food, access to oil?
And all these environmental problems often are trade-offs. So it's like like plastic, which I think we're going to do like a whole part 2 to this episode just on plastic.
Get into plastics, yeah.
Joe likes to eat plastic at the beach, and it's kind of inspired him. But
we'll explain later.
Basically, Joe collects garbage and plastics at the beach.
Yeah.
And I would say, back in the 60s or something, like the way people were thinking about environmentalism and pollution, micro beads and microplastics and those things weren't like the center of the conversation.
Yeah, they weren't even on the radar yet.
The EPA was only formed in 1970.
I think it was 70. Yeah.
70.
Yeah, it's not as old as probably people think.
So ideas about taking care of the environment go back like pretty far. I even wrote something in our little note thing.
Oh shit! I forgot to bring it up on the screen.
Oh, it's fine. I enjoy looking at myself, how I look in a frog suit more than anything, I think.
I mean, it is entertaining, at least for me.
Want me to give a little hop?
Yeah, can you give a hop? See, this is what you get, everybody, for not watching. Don't you wish you were in the live stream now, people? Nobody.
Well, our last live Instagram thing, everybody was like, ribbit, we want to see Luke in a frog suit.
That's true. How did that word spread so quickly?
Thunk Tankers listeners get what they want,
Yeah, we treat them well.
So
anyways.
What was I saying?
You were talking about how unhappy you are about the environment, the state of the environment.
Right. So one of the things that, and maybe we'll get into the plastic thing, but
yeah,
it almost seems like humans, as we're dealing with like pollution, right? What would you say is the first big historical event that caused humans to kind of wake up and be like, oh shit, like we got to do something?
Ooh, that's a good question. In terms of pollution or global warming, or
because like technically pollution, however you define that, like now we define it as like the particulate matter in the air that fucks with shit. But
I mean, I think in terms of the EPA, I've read that it was something about what was it? BEP something, or it was some sort of chemical.
Oh, the from the 60s, it was the
that was
fertilizer.
It was killing like bird eggs or something. DDT. I don't remember what it was. I thought it was BP something, but BPH or something like that. But it was killing like bird eggs or something, right?
Well, okay. Oh, DDT, yeah.
It was DDT.
Yeah.
It was killing bird eggs, right?
It was doing a lot of shit, and I think that like Dow Chemical was like the.
But it's like one of those things where it's not. You can just get rid of it or change to something else. Like it's one of those chemicals where it's like, okay, maybe it's easy and cheap to make, but is that worth the environmental impact? Then in the 90s, it was the same thing with ozone, shit that was destroying the ozone layer.
The hole in the ozone layer. I remember growing up through middle school. But
Yeah.
the one I was.
But they're on their way to fixing that now. It's going to take like another 50 years.
I always thought, like, what do guys go up there with like a big tall ladder and just like start patching the layer of the ozone?
But just banning the shit that was causing it, like the
has had an
aerosols,
effect.
well, it's going to take like 40, 50 more years, but it's already having an effect.
Sure, yeah. I was
So it's like-
I was hinting at the Industrial Revolution though, like of the late 1800s,
Well, that's
where companies like because like maybe a combination of they didn't know any better /
they didn't give a fuck.
they didn't give a fuck, you know, just dumping waste products.
Yeah.
You heard about these trees getting covered in soot, you know, and people in the throughout the 1800s, Romanticism was also an artistic movement that focused so much on nature. You know, like when I listen to Schubert song cycles or Mahler song cycles, like poetry, like Heinrich Heine, Hiene.
Yeah. Okay.
Not like the Heine behind my butt flap in this frog suit, which does exist, people.
If you're joining us now,
You know,
that may be
because when I
confusing.
put my frog suit on, if I have to take a dump, I don't want to have to take it off.
I'm loving that the frog suit comes with a little zipper. That's
Frog
amazing.
suit, somebody commented.
See,
Cheers.
I knew the frog suit would
Ribbit,
be a good
ribbit.
idea. Yeah. Ribbit.
Hopefully you
Hashtag.
can hear us and we didn't fuck anything up.
I'm gonna hashtag. Yeah, if you can hear us, give us a ribbit. We'll see if that works.
So like when you read that kind of poetry, it's all focused on
Yeah, romanticism. Yeah.
people turning to nature for guidance.
Yeah.
Often this like wandering archetype where a man has unrequited love in town and goes on a long journey
And
to
then
find himself in nature.
chokes on the train exhaust.
And yeah, and then like when you're at this like beautiful stream and you see like all the waste products of like the Industrial Revolution,
Yeah.
and then you confront the businessman, you're like, you really shouldn't be doing this, and they're like, oh, go eat a dick. Like,
Yeah, I feel
We're
like I feel like the hashtag of the Industrial Revolution would have been like hashtag not my problem.
yeah,
Not my fucking problem, right? But it's funny because I think that have you read that book, the sixth extinction?
no,
It's all about how basically humans are caught. Like, there's been 5 mass extinctions throughout history.
okay,
Like the meteor that killed the dinosaurs was one.
and each one kills almost everything, but not quite everything.
Yeah, not quite everything, or it kills like at least half or
I
something.
mean,
like that,
of
right?
all the species that have ever existed, 99.999%.
Sure, but there's moments
Perished.
of these mass extinctions, right? It's like
Yeah.
Between them, of course, like way more species go extinct, but there's these specific moments where like a lot go extinct very quickly, and we're now at the point since the Industrial Revolution where people are starting to categorize this as a 6th extinction event because so many species, you know, are dying off. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's something interesting to look into because
Like right now, like it's happening, but it's not sudden, right?
well, so that's
I mean, the
that's
ice
the pro-
ages in that kind of
Yeah,
calculation.
sure. But that's the problem is that, especially modern humans, like we're obsessed with apocalypses in like our culture and media, like zombie apocalypses, meteor apocalypses. It's all in TV and movies, but we're actually possibly living one right now.
Well, how would you know?
Well, because it's not sexy. It's not, you know, ooh, giant meteors, ooh, earthquakes, ooh, volcanoes. It might take 200, 300, 400 years, right?
Okay,
But then if we get to a point where all of a sudden, oh, we're out of oil, we didn't plan for that. There's no more fresh water, we didn't plan for that. There's no, like, you know, the sea levels are rising because all the ice is melting, we didn't plan for that. This is how, you know, globalized empires collapse. There's a great lecture, I'll link in the description.
will you?
And, well, because I can actually go back and listen now. But it was this guy, he was talking about how in Western culture, there's been so far 2 great collapses. The one that everybody knows about is ancient Rome, the collapse of ancient Rome. But the other that many fewer people...
And people always talk about the U.S. as approaching
as
that.
the third one, yeah, as the third one. And the other one, the older one, was the end of the Bronze Age. And what's interesting about both of those collapses, which to the people at the time they might consider to be like an apocalypse or just a total breakdown, rather.
Or they might just be like, ah!
Yeah.
Ah!
Well, the thing is that like they didn't happen overnight. They didn't like they're
Of course.
like you're taught in, and again, this is what I'm saying.
You
like,
read history books, it's like every
Rome
100
fell-
years is
yeah.
like one thing.
well,
or something
Rome fell
like that.
in 476 AD, and it's like, well, maybe the city, but there was that's just for the people in that city, right? Like it was degrading long before that. And the example he gives of the Bronze Age is really interesting because you can consider that to be a globalized society. He shows how you had like the Egyptians, you had the Babylonians, you had the Greeks, you had all these cultures, and they were all in contact with each other. Within their realm, they had a globalized economy. They had trade routes and everything. And once these pressures were put on them from all sides, where they got invaded by these people who they called the Sea Peoples from the West in the Mediterranean, there were natural disasters too. There was also drought and famine. There was like a dry period for 100 years or something like that.
A few things that they couldn't keep up with.
Exactly. All of these factors eventually cut off one of the supply routes for like tin or something that you used to make bronze. And once that fell, it became a domino effect, and all these empires collapsed. So it wasn't necessarily like
because they depend on each other to some extent.
Exactly, and you could point to one single causal factor in there and say, well, that was it, but it was set up by all of these other factors that
I guess like anything, that's the whole.
Well, and look at us today. Like, we're running out of oil, we're overpopulated, we're running out of other resources like clean water.
However, I will say we're smarter than ever, and
that's
technology is a game changer, specifically maybe when all of these problems are confronting.
But our problems are game changers. Look at the human population throughout history, where these other disasters happen, and compare that to now, and it's
a population. I was just reading about like the formation of the EPA earlier, and I just saw something about what the population of the world was in 1960. It was 3 billion.
Yeah.
Now it's almost 8 billion.
That's so. To your point, that's an interesting point, that technology is a game changer, but the problems that we're dealing with are in of themselves. When you say unprecedented, that doesn't do it justice, right? Because saying it's unprecedented might mean, the population has like increased 50%. Like, that's a lot more people. It's like it's been like almost an asymptotal curve.
Well,
that might be impossible
so many
to
things
deal with
follow
with
that
technology.
Exponential type curve.
Yeah,
there's something.
But resource depletion is one of them.
Population growth is one of them.
Yeah, sure.
And if you look at the graph of how much plastic, since it was invented in the early 1900s, has been dumped into the oceans, it's risen exponentially too. Like all these things are like the phrase exponential has kind of taken on like a popular meaning. Yeah. Like, this orchestra is exponentially better than it was last year. It's like, is it, or is it just a little better? And you're just using an adverb. I just mean like people use it in that kind of way.
Yeah.
Whereas like exponentially literally means 2 becomes 4 becomes 8 becomes 64, and all of a sudden you're like, it's the famous example they used to describe exponential growth. I think maybe this was in economics that I saw it, was you put one droplet of water on the pitcher's mound of a baseball stadium.
Yeah.
And then you look to see how much water you have after it doubles every, second, right?
Is my mic on?
Yeah, you're good. Right. I just keep looking. I didn't know what was happening before with like the squealy wheelies.
You're recording?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So like it only takes like an hour or something like that. I forget the exact details of like every second it doubles until the whole stadium's filled up with water.
Right. But towards the end, it probably becomes very quick.
Well, that's the thing. Imagine you're looking at water develop on the pitcher's mound, and everybody in the stadium's like, we don't really have that much of a problem. No worries, blah, blah, blah. And then the whole bottom part of the stadium is filled up with water, and everybody's like, what's going on with that water thing? Should we do something about it? And it's like, no, don't worry. Like, we're all the way up here. Yeah. And then before you know how to do anything about it, you're drowning.
Right. So that's my worry, because I agree with you that technology is a game
metaphorically
changer.
But also global warming wise, it could be literally like coastal cities.
That's what I mean. If it's like, it could come to a point where it's too late in the sense of like, well, yeah, maybe we can like stop global warming, but if all these cities are underwater, and again, it disrupts the balance, and one domino starts to fall. This is what's happened throughout history, like with those other two examples, where it was like, once those dominoes started, didn't matter like what well-intentioned or smart people did, it was too late. It wasn't enough.
The scary thing is also that I don't think we're worried about entities like the US government or Russia or China or the big players in the world like non-existing, right? There's just going to be a big change in population, and then maybe a lot of the things we hold dear, like freedoms and things, in this kind of martial law military future where
1984, that's what it's about.
I mean, things change really quick when the environment changes, right?
there's a great article. Did I send it to you about how the Syrian civil war that can all be traced back to desertification of their farmlands?
I think you mentioned it. I didn't.
It's fucked
remember
up,
reading
dude.
it.
I'll link that in the description too.
Oh wow, he's linking two things,
But
guys.
dude, it's fucked up because it's all about how in the like mid 2000s, all of a sudden, all this farmland they had like a really bad drought. You know, they're part. I think they're part of what would have been classically considered the Fertile Crescent.
Yeah, the Tigris and Euphrates
and
River going
that's-
right through Syria,
but that's-
Baghdad
But
area.
that's all drying up,
Iraq.
and after a lot of that farmland dried up, or as it dried up, they had an influx of people moving to the cities to look for work and to try to get like social services and shit. And they were like, we don't have that. Like, you were supposed to bring food. Like, there is not more here. Like, you were the guys who were supposed to bring it. And that's when shit started to break down there. And that's a scary potential microcosm example of global environmental degradation, especially with just ever increasing population.
Well, we like to think that humans are these like very decent creatures, and I think of all the creatures
they are in
that
in the right
exist,
circumstances.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, we have the ability to be very, very decent and good natured and kind and all of the kind of good things that we value in like stable life, right?
Yeah.
But the second you get to the kind of future where your next meal is not guaranteed,
And that guy has it.
yeah, you don't know what you're capable of. I mean, some people
Well, that's been proven
I
throughout
think
history
do
too.
know what they're capable of, and I think the more you know what you're capable of, the better.
Yeah.
In other words, there are dark corners in your mind where there's like shadows of your former chimpanzee ancestors bashing an enemy chimpanzee with a rock until their head is flattened.
I want those bananas.
Yeah, give me back my bananas.
Give me those bananas.
I'm in a frog suit, so I won't impersonate a monkey, but
Well, give me the fucking. What do frogs eat? Bugs, flies. Give me your fucking.
I always bring up
flies.
Walking Dead as an example of that. Like,
Well, that's what it's
where
about.
you just see the personality changes, and some people have a stronger sense of morality. In other words, Rick was someone who did the right thing for deep reasons, and it took him a long time before he kind of broke down.
Well, he also did, and then he gets to like kind of like a middle ground where he does the right thing as much as he can.
but he realizes
But
he'll
also,
get screwed
he'll
over.
also
by
bite
being-
your fucking throat if you're gonna rape his son.
Yeah. Also,
Like no questions asked.
he went from like
Which fair enough.
if they
right?
stumbled upon outsiders that were like, please, we need help,
Yeah.
and took advantage of his good nature, how many times did he get screwed over by that because they stole all their shit and killed one of their guys?
There's a great
whatever it
There's a great
was.
scene. And I may be spoiling this. But,
Walking Dead spoiler alert.
But
Honestly, if you're not caught up on that, like,
but the
what
show,
are you doing?
the show also sucks now. So like, only watch.
I kind of
like,
stopped watching it.
Yeah,
myself.
only watch till like season 7. Like they fucking botched that show after like season 7 or 8, whatever. But there's a great scene where he meets these cannibals who are these types of people who they're pushed to this extreme limit, and they just go for it. They're like, yeah, we're gonna fucking capture people, lure them in, and fucking eat them.
Yeah, it's
And-
food.
Yeah, it's food.
Uninfected meat.
Like it's nothing personal, but like, yeah, we got to do it. And he tells the guy when they're about to kill him, he says, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill you with this like, or I'm going to kill you with like this machete or something like that, or like that machete that you have. And the guy's just like, that's hilarious because I'm about to kill you for food. And then of course shit goes wild, and he winds up like eventually facing the guy. And
Was that the strategically best thing? Is to like, if you can kill the guy or not kill the guy, but don't warn him you're about to do it.
well, he was just buying time, I think.
I think so.
Because
Yeah.
in that situation, it's like, well, we're probably all going to die, but buy as much time as you can. But anyways, long story short, he winds up eventually reversing positions like over like a season, and then the guy's faced in the position where Rick's about to kill him, and the guy just goes, because he shoots most of them, and there's like 3 of them left, and they surrender, and the guy goes, like, Rick gives his speech, and the guy goes, you're not going to kill me, like, you would have shot me if you were going to kill me, and Rick just looks at him, shrugs, and goes, didn't want to waste the bullets.
Right.
And he's like, and I promised
He
you.
says it like this. Didn't want to waste the bullets. Like, he says it like so unemotionally.
Yeah,
you know?
he's just like, yeah, no, why would I waste bullets? Like, I have you in the position where you're totally screwed. And then he of course murders him.
Yeah. I think everybody's different. There are different personality types and different, limits. the thing that scares me about
Sure.
people sometimes is sometimes I meet people and I think, the only reason that you seem to be being a good person is because you're worried you'll get in trouble if you did what you want.
That is scary.
And I just met people where I kind of, it's more of like an instinct, like something deeply evolved in my mind with like, you can all experience this when you meet someone. Like if you just kind of pay attention to subtle things about facial expressions and energy and
Have you read Dune?
no.
You should really read Dune. Do you want a copy?
Sure.
Yeah, because there's this school. I don't know how to pronounce it, but they're basically like people consider them to be witches, but they've just been training for like thousands of years on how to read facial expressions and like vocal expressions, and they know if you're lying just by looking at you as you talk.
Is that the one that the guy beat the card game by not looking at the cards?
No, that's a Philip K. Dick book.
Right,
This is Frank Herbert. But yeah, you should read Dune because they're just like, basically they're just like, oh yeah, if we just train to figure this out over the next 10,000 years, we'll evolve to do it essentially.
And I think our brains do a lot of that subconsciously. Have you ever heard of these type of people called mentalists?
Oh my god, in Dune they're called mentats.
Oh really?
Yeah, you got to read Dune.
So like if we brought a mentalist in the room right now, and you didn't know that it was a thing that someone could do.
Yeah.
Mentalists are these people that train, and they must have some natural gift to begin with, probably.
Yeah.
But basically, they train at reading people's body language and facial expressions and all of these things that we give out way more information than we're aware of.
Yeah, and we never trained to look for that, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
you don't learn that shit in grade school.
Parts of our unconscious brain, I think, read those things and give us information about it.
Yeah.
In a way, but yeah, we don't train to be conscious and like actually notice those things. So this guy, I'll post a link to this. Like,
we're making a lot of posts.
Well, 3 so far. I'm trying to keep like mental track, but
yeah, I already forgot the first 2.
Yeah.
Syria, right?
But yeah, it's he can basically. It appears like he's a magician. And the whole reason he does it is to say, I am not using magic. I'm not claiming to be magic.
Right.
I'm just very good at reading people.
Yeah. And that's a very fine-tuned skill in that sense, right?
Yeah. So speaking of that, like that came up because I was saying there are some people that if an apocalypse type event happened, they would be in their optimal environment.
Yeah.
In other words, I think a lot of people, like I would say us, have the personality types and evolved to exist in a very stable, peaceful world where there are rules, and following those rules for good reasons are rewarded.
Yeah.
And there are people that thrive better, right? More alpha type people, right? And that alpha energy, right? The same alpha energy that makes a wolf become leader of a wolf pack.
Right.
That can get you to the top of a corporation, like a CEO.
Right.
Can get you to climb the law firm that you're working at. But if you're now in Walking Dead type world, it will get you to be who's the fucking
Negan.
Negan.
Yeah.
That guy's terrifying.
Well, Negan's whole thing is like, I guess I'll start smashing heads.
Right.
And people were like, hey, let's go with the guy who's smashing heads because I don't want my head smashed.
And I thought deeply about like what made Negan work, what made him so powerful.
He's so much more interesting in the comics too.
I bet. I mean,
because in the comics he comes to like regret everything he's done. Like he spends so
interesting.
Yeah, he spends so much time later in the
regret's hard to feel though. A lot of people just bury it deep. Well, they pretend they don't feel it.
I don't want to spoil it for you, but you should read the comics are way better than the show.
Do you have them?
Yeah, they're on YouTube.
Oh
shit! Enough. I shouldn't have said that.
YouTube, don't take them off.
I know. Well, I know how to find them. There's a secret trick. I'll tell you.
So I just wanted to talk about the politics of
we got dark there
of conservation and environmentalism because I've heard this point before. It's not like it's original to me, but when you think about the word conservation and then the sort of political ideology of a conservative, you would think a conservative would be someone who really cares about conservation of anything, right? They're conserving stability. They're wanting to keep things the way they are and not have things drastically change,
which they're doing for their corporations.
So it's just like their conserving principles are just being applied to
elsewhere.
And it also, you hinted at this earlier, but it's this idea that why does everything have to be politicized? Because the second something gets dragged into the political arena, all of a sudden the thinking becomes so muddy, and you see people believing shitty things for shitty reasons. They're not aware of their logical, disconnects, and it's just because it got placed in this category that we call politics. And so much of that I found, and I blame the left and the right equally, because I meet people on the left, and you know what? This identity politics idea would be that if I tell you I'm on the left, then we can go down the checklist of different political ideas, and you can tell me which opinion I might have.
Right.
Which means I'm not an individual. I'm someone who's just on a team.
Yeah.
And so that's all know that
why I don't have a political affiliation. I refuse.
Yeah.
And people are shocked by that, especially my Democrat friends. They're like, "What do you mean you're not a Democrat?" And I'm like, "Why would I?"
Well, one of the things I dislike about Democrats
and then they get really mad.
And people on the left is, and I don't know as many people on the right, but I've been actively trying to watch more conservative media and consume more content so I can just understand things better. I grew up very left-leaning and only having access to left-leaning things.
Are you registered as a Democrat?
I think I still am. I don't know if I changed it. I was during the 2016 election, I voted for Bernie.
Oh, you could, yeah.
I could, which means I must have still been registered as a Democrat.
Right. Yeah, that checks out.
Even though when I moved and registered to vote, I didn't think to myself, I'm proudly a Democrat. I just thought this seems strategic because I want to have a say in the primaries.
Yeah.
But,
which is a good reason. It's probably a better reason than most.
We would attack a conservative who's saying, I don't think global warming is real, and say you're anti-science, right?
Yeah.
But then for the people on the left, it's not like they've gone and did the work to understand the science. They just, say, in other words, if you pry their opinions, if you claw at them and try to figure out, exactly why they believe what they believe, it's actually supported by just as little real information in their head. So they've made just as many assumptions and they have just as many gaps of knowledge. And they're just relying on, I've just been told that this is science. Yeah.
Well, part of the problem too, so from my standpoint, it's sort of the issue is sort of the fact that I'm pretty stupid. I don't think.
No, you're smart enough to know how stupid you are.
Well, so maybe that's true, but here's the thing. I've actually read.
That was a compliment.
Oh God, that's where we're at. I've actually read some of the data, a lot of the data, because I'll have students who write about global warming and climate change, and I'll look at the sources and I'll read the data. So I know it's true, but I can't tell you one specific study. I can't tell you.
Well, that's okay. I'm not saying that you have to walk around through the world and be able to cite every scientific study on the drop of a hat. As
devil's advocate, if a conservative tells me, name a study, I'd be like, I don't know. I'd have to go online and find one. It doesn't mean that I know for a fact that it's true. I can show you the evidence and the data that shows that this is true. I would just need to find it first.
Fair enough. Although I remember when I was a bit younger, when I was in my undergrad, I think this was still an undergrad, but I hung out with a lot of older people because I was 19, 20.
You're going with the older swinger crowd.
Nice. No, I'm talking these guys were 25, 26, because I was playing with and hanging out with a lot of doctoral students. Yeah. It ended up being a great part of where I got my undergrad, that I was around more mature and older musicians.
Yeah.
So I remember I was going on about some kind of science thing, something about space, some kind of discovery that had happened recently. And the person just decided to do this little game, this devil's advocate game, where he's like, well, how do you know that? And then I had to go to the next layer of well, because light takes time to track, whatever the thing was. And then, well, how do you know that? And eventually it came down to me saying, well, I have not myself.
Have you sifted through the data yourself, poured through these numbers?
Yeah, and it gets to this point where I'm like, we don't know so much. In other words, your experience of being a human, if you even assume that your eyesight is real, maybe that's fake.
Yeah,
maybe the
right.
whole thing's,
Right.
in a simulation. But let's assume that your eyesight is real. You're this tiny data collector, and you're mostly going through the world and barely collecting any information. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, I hear that.
So, like, I was driving back from Massachusetts today, right?
Yeah.
And I was listening to a few different podcasts, and I started thinking to myself, at some point, like, it was like 3 hours in. It ended up taking 5 hours. It was miserable, traffic-wise.
Oh, did you take the ferry?
I was passing by Bridgeport, and my instinct told me to take the ferry, and then
Yeah,
I was
you
like,
sh- you should've
$60,
followed
not worth
yeah.
it. And then
Oh, yeah.
in New York City traffic, I was like, I fucked up.
Yeah. Oh.
Because it was a Friday, you know?
Yeah.
So at some point, my brain got kind of tired from the podcast that I was listening to, and I hit pause on it. And then this is the thought that started getting into my mind. I was like, I have no idea what's going on in most of the world. And like, I'm taking in like little bits of data as I'm driving. One of the things that's trippy about driving is you're going 60, 70 miles per hour.
We talked about this the
and
other
like
day.
your memory of a road trip, you're like, I don't remember going into Connecticut.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, no, you spent like an hour and a half
Yeah.
in Connecticut. What do you mean you don't remember Connecticut?
Yeah, I got the gist of it while it was happening.
Because like so much of the data just so to speak, goes in one eye, out the other eye, you know?
Yeah.
And we were talking on the porch the other night how like your eye has like very high resolution in the center, and then like at the peripherals it's like very low resolution.
I like how you say the porch like anybody knows what that means.
A porch. Basically, we were going to podcast on Monday night. Was it Monday?
What day is it now?
Someday. No, yeah, it was
someday.
Monday.
It was someday.
It was Monday.
Yeah.
And we ended up just like basically doing a podcast, but without hitting record on Joe's porch. So I get this.
Yeah.
One, I guess, like a zoomed out point is I hate the idea that things become political, because as soon as they become political, it's like they get flagged and they become infinitely harder to talk about, to have a straight conversation. So if I'm talking to somebody who I politically disagree with, we could be talking about how to make.
You're already going in like pounding against.
And sometimes it's going great until the politics comes up.
Right.
So like I'm talking about a paella recipe and we're having a great time, and then something comes up about like political correctness on campus, and I like say something and they're like, well, that sounds problematic. And I'm like, why'd you just use that word? Like, and then you figure out like, oh man, like we not only have a lot that we could fight about, but mostly there's so much that we misunderstand about each other. That it would actually take 3 hours.
It would take a while.
Very patiently sitting down and working through. What have you watched and seen, and what data have you collected to lead to your opinions? Because I clearly have watched and seen and collected data that led me to a different
and most
thing.
people aren't willing to do that, right?
Well, it takes a lot of maturity. It takes a lot of patience. I'm not saying the only thing I would say I'm good at is I can mindfully kind of notice when my brain is about to go into a fighting mode now. And I just go, easy, big fella. And I back myself down.
Well, you know, in terms of maturity and patience, you are in a frog suit. So
covered in beer, frog suit covered in beer.
I had one to your point though. I feel like I said that a lot to your point, and it means nothing. But
it means as a reflection to your point.
It means I had to say something.
The other thing you say a lot is funny. You said that. Say that.
But funny you say that actually. I had and it was like Eco 101, like Introduction to Ecology, and the first class, the professor basically spent the whole time just explaining the fact that, look, I'm not telling you what to do about pollution, climate change, global warming, any of that. I'm just here to show you the data and the evidence and draw conclusions from that, and then what you choose to do with that information is up to you. And he would then, and then the rest of the semester.
That's a healthy way to do it.
And it turns out, well, what I liked about that is clearly his point was like, pollution and global warming is a huge fucking issue and we need to do something about it. But his whole point was, here's the data. I'm just going to show you the raw data and see whatever conclusions you come to. And by doing that work in depth and well, oh, look at that. It happens that you probably oftentimes come to the similar conclusions that he has maybe about what we should do about it. And
especially if you go in with a healthy openness to falling on either side.
Well, how else do you draw people in, right?
And
maybe
politics
don't agree
does
with
exactly
you.
the opposite of that. It
Right.
says, hey.
Yeah. Well, he started by non-politicizing it, which
Sure.
I thought was brilliant, and that's the same
So
thing.
how do you non-politicize something then?
Well, he just shows you the evidence, and he shows.
No,
you the
I don't
data.
mean like on a local scale like that. I mean, take any issue. There are certain issues. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. What's an issue that used to just be mainstream knowledge that has become politicized? And the one that just popped into my head happens to be one where I think
this isn't going to be good.
When I was a bit younger, I used to think the left of politics was the party that stood with science and used science and respected science, and those damn right-wingers don't understand science, blah, blah, blah. And there's still a lot of people on the right. Specifically, I remember hearing some of the things this conservative woman that gained popularity because Kanye West tweeted about her, Candace Owens.
Can we get Kanye West to tweet about us?
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
She's a black conservative woman, and like one of the reasons that I think she has climbed in popularity is the left and the tactics that they usually use to discredit people and get rid of them, so to speak.
Yeah.
They can't really use those tactics on a black woman, right? So
I'm not saying anything.
So
I mean, you're green.
I was when she was first coming onto the scene, and because she got popularity from Kanye.
Was she the one on Joe Rogan?
Yes, and so I'm getting to that.
Oh yeah, that was the one I had to stop on.
Yeah, I turned her off. I was driving back from Richmond, Virginia, another great beer city, and I downloaded this episode because I thought, you know what, like I am intrigued by the sort of mismatched identity of
and Joe Rogan handled it pretty well, I thought.
Well, let's just explain what happened.
I mean, from what I saw, basically he was trying to be like, all right, let's get to a point of something we can agree upon, and she was just like, no.
Well, we didn't even say the premise, which was they were talking about a lot of things, and then the topic of global warming came up, and she just flat out denied global warming.
And he kept trying to bring up the fact that there is science. In fact, it's pretty conclusive and it's pretty comprehensive.
As far as I remember, it took about 10 minutes for her to even concede that global warming is just a fact, right?
Well, that was his point. He kept trying to say, I'm not trying to make a political statement. I'm just trying to explain that, Well,
he had a few points, but the first one was can we agree that global temperatures on average are rising?
Right.
Which is just a data point, right?
Well, that's just factual.
And then the
Forget
second
about
part
pollution.
is, can we agree that humans, to the exact degree that humans are responsible for global warming, we don't know, but
they are.
Opinions range from a little bit to a lot, and most opinions say that we are the primary driver of global warming as we're seeing it right now.
Right.
One of the factors that people don't talk about, or I don't hear people talking about a lot, certainly not in mainstream circles, is not just CO2 in the atmosphere, but that the oceans actually absorb CO2 and lead to what's called ocean acidification.
So much to say about the oceans.
And it fucks with so much. There's just too much. I'm not even well versed enough to go into a whole spiel on acidification of the oceans. But my main point being, I just saw that she and she at least admitted that this is not the hill she wants to die on. I think that's the phrase she used.
Oh, did she really?
Yeah, because he's a very competent interviewer.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that Joe Rogan's great at is he's like a vacuum that can suck out whatever faults the person has, but not in a negative way, in a very just
No, it's not vindictive or trying to get you or gotcha.
It's actually in the most friendly way you can imagine, and that's why it works. People
I feel
can't be in fight mode against
I feel like if you go on that podcast and you have a bad experience, you done fucked up.
It's probably your fault.
Yeah, it's probably definitely your fault.
And he's done and said a lot of things that have ruined other people's careers, but because he's a comedian and doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah, he does.
And two, because he's a kind person, who just has some reasonable opinions, and he's mostly left leaning. That it really works for him in that way. And he's also a very flexible person. He's changed his mind a lot. He used to not believe that we went to the moon. And now he realizes that's like a silly conspiracy theory. He just got caught up in it.
Well, I mean, because he's been brainwashed by all the people who want you to think that. But you know what the real problem is? The real problem is that
hurricanes.
I was going to say it's hurricane next because I drank way too much coffee and I have to go pee.
Oh, shit.
But I will bring back more beer. So I'm going to let you riff for
Which
a minute.
beer?
What do you want? I'm gonna get the 2 other beers we haven't had.
Fair enough. And folks, Johnny might be joining us.
Is he gonna join this episode?
Well, not this episode, probably. I'll check when he's going to be back. But the plan is this is going to be part 1 of some kind of pollution environment kind of episode, and then Johnny will be able to join us for part 2. So I had this idea when I was thinking about like things becoming political in this kind of way. People just all of a sudden stop thinking clearly. And then I had this idea of like, I understand that we have to sort of be careful about what we do with the environment and how we keep an eye on just our consumption and plastics. But there's also something kind of negative because we're told so often about how we're destroying the world, how everything we do, from driving our cars to everything you buy is in some kind of plastic packaging that just gets thrown away. And it's very easy to get caught in the feeling that everything, you can think to yourself, basically, everything I'm doing is just adding to the negativity of the world. Even the positive things you try to do, you probably had to like drive somewhere to go do that thing. Or you bought someone a gift, but that gift comes in like plastic wrapping, or everything seems to be tainted by this negative thing. And then on top of that, you think to yourself, okay, well, what if I singularly started like trying to help out by like, buying less plastic, getting toothpaste that doesn't have microplastics in it? Or what if I saved up a little bit more money and bought a Prius instead of, a Ford Focus, or, something that gets really good mileage? Or what if I didn't even buy a car and only took public transportation? And then you also think like, well, what kind of an effect would that have? Like would that really change much? Because there's billions of other people not giving a shit about that. So I think it's very easy to become nihilistic about it and just think, well, fuck it. Why should I care? Like, why should I do anything? The little bit I'm going to do is not going to have any effect in the world. Like, so whatever, I'm not going to do anything.
What the fuck are you talking to? It's just funny to like come back into the studio and you're just rambling to yourself.
No, I'm talking to Frank.
Oh, how is
He's
he?
my frog friend. I was just talking about like the nihilism idea that when you learn about how much we're fucking with the environment, it's very easy to become like nihilistic about it.
Well, what can I do about it? I still need my sandwich. And now I sound like Patrick Star. I don't know, SpongeBob. Why don't you clean the environment?
Also, I think the tape on the camera is like very slowly falling down.
No, what are you talking about?
Our
Our professional rig is standing up to the highest of standards.
So, Joe, I was thinking about this idea. I mean, we've talked about this a few times with Tragedy of the Commons, and maybe we can close on this point and then aim for part 2 on plastics.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Can you explain Tragedy of the Commons?
So if a guy has a bunch of sheep, right? Is that how the story goes? If they have a bunch of sheep?
I mean, explain it however you want, but
yeah,
I started a rant about just sort of like how learning about how much we're destroying everything.
Yeah,
it's so easy to fall on the side of like, well, fuck it, why should I do anything? It's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, so Tragedy of the Commons very simply is this idea that say you have a field of sheep. I don't know why I keep coming back to the sheep, but you have a field of sheep, right? And if you have a bunch of farmers and everybody takes just one sheep, that's enough to replenish the sheep population so that we never run out of sheep. But if one of the farmers realizes, hey, as long as everybody else only takes one sheep, I could take 2 and just wind up being pretty rich. And if nobody notices, I'm good to go. But if everybody does that, or enough people do it where it winds up all of a sudden that there's no sheep left, then everybody's fucked. And you can apply that to any idea or any resource, right? Or any shared resource. So,
or any shared responsibility.
Responsibility over resources. So if you think about the ocean, for example, I mean, we'll talk more about this in the next episode on beach cleaning, but you see it all the time where shit people just throw out into the ocean or on the beach or in rivers that winds up on the beach. It's mostly shit where people clearly thought to themselves, or they didn't think. They just said, fuck it, not my problem.
So those kind of people, I can't even empathize with that level of, I don't know, is it laziness?
Well, which is worse, the people who don't think about it or the people who think, what's the difference? Because there are definitely a lot of people who don't even think about it. They just toss whatever
and that,
without a thought, which is worse.
So on one of these moments in my 5-hour drive today where when I'm driving a long car trip, I usually have a podcast going.
Yeah.
Or I'll have music going.
Yeah.
Or I'll do like 20 minutes of silence and just kind of let thoughts come and go. And one of the thoughts that came and went, because I knew we were going to do something on pollution, and I thought to myself, if I were at the beach and I had like some kind of big picnic kind of thing, almost definitely when I was done, there would be this like priority from within to just like quickly clean up, especially before like wind blew my garbage everywhere. So
now, would you feel the same way 10 years ago when you were a teenager?
Yes, and this is why I had this thought. It was that the level of me not leaving trash on the beach is not even just a logical level of like, well, if I do this, then this will happen. It's just like at the same way you don't want to eat poop. Like there's just like an instinct that's like, oh, that's not food.
Right.
Like
right.
I'm like, that's not good.
Yeah.
You know, right and wrong come from deep things, and the deeper down in like your development that you learn this, like my parents were very good teachers of like these basic things, like you don't litter.
Yeah.
Like I remember growing up
when
that
my
should
mom,
be
something taught like either by parents or like in school. It's like
or both.
Yeah,
you need both.
There's no, as far as I know, like we didn't take a fucking civics class which told us like why not to litter.
Right, but just think of littering. Like I remember, so today I was driving and some fat ugly woman cut me off in like a really just kind of like, oh, go fuck yourself kind of way. Smoking a cigarette, and guess what she did with the cigarette when she was halfway done with it? Threw it right out the window.
Dude, there's nothing more infuriating to me than people driving smoking cigarettes. It's just so because you know they're gonna flip them.
Can I tell you what's worse? I once saw somebody throw out their actual garbage from their car window.
Just toss it on the side of their road.
Yeah, like fast food wrappers and like a fry container.
Did I tell you about?
Threw it out the window onto the side of the road and kept.
Did I tell you about the KFC massacre I found the other day?
Massacre?
So you'll have to listen to episode 2 on part 2 on beach cleaning to find out more.
So
who am I winking at? There's like 2 cameras.
As a transition into what we're going to talk about in this next part, which is like plastics.
Yeah.
I
Plastic
was
pollution.
reading that like in 17 something.
Oh, Ben Franklin.
The Ben Franklin thing.
Yeah.
How he was like, petitioning to. Make regulations for these businesses outside of Philadelphia that were just dumping their waste.
Yeah, because they don't give a fuck. It's Philly, baby.
And their argument back was very similar to the kinds of arguments you hear back from like many businesses.
Sure, yeah.
Which was like, what about our rights? We can do whatever we want. We're free people. And so these are ideas that had to be established. The idea that like, no, the public as an entity has a right to land, has a right to a decency of living, like
and
national parks
that shared responsibility, right?
The share of responsibility, like when you go to a campground, those kind of rules of like leave it the way you found it.
That's what's fucked up. The idea that on a political level or a politicized level, that's like a leftist stance.
Which is why is it? Why
what the fuck?
Okay, in my estimation, we have good and bad is one, like moral and immoral is one dimension. And that's not the same as left and right.
No, it shouldn't.
If you're a hard lefty or a hard righty, and this might be a good indication if you're listening to this and you're thinking, no, I'm a lefty because I'm correct about things. It's like if you think because you're a lefty, you're more moral. It's like you might, on certain specific beliefs you have, you might be more moral because of those specific beliefs. That doesn't apply to
the rest of the spectrum.
Yeah. And there's no guarantee that like.
Yeah.
The left-right thing is like it wanders to and fro. It generally has these ideas of like people on the more right-leaning side of politics tend to have like, you know, they value categories and structure and like hierarchies, and people on the left tend to value openness and things like that.
Yeah.
I tend to be more of an open person who's like, yeah, like, oh, you're weird in that way. I find that cool. You know, I find like I like traveling because like I see like new ways people do things. Like,
well, that's what's interesting about political affiliation, at least from my standpoint, because you take something like environmentalism, right? And somebody who's on the hard right or on the right, it's like they may argue that, like, I've heard this argument. I've gotten into this debate with people that, well, the market will solve it. The market will figure it out. And to me, that's such a like a low level thinking argument when you think about like global impacts, right? And collective global waste. That,
I mean, it is true sometimes with some things.
But this can be a huge gamble, right? This can be a huge.
Well, so people say the market will figure it out with global warming. I haven't been convinced by that argument.
I haven't been convinced by that argument.
I
either.
understand this argument, which is
I understand that argument.
Be careful about any kind of government bureaucracy trying to solve a problem, because they often, even if they go in with good intentions, out the other side,
so here's
make it worse in some
here's
unpredictable way.
And to me, the question is like, which is worse, right? Government bureaucracy as a general idea, it's like it often costs more than obviously somebody who isn't part of the bureaucracy could do it. But unless they're willing to step in and do it, nobody might be willing to do it. And there's examples of this.
There's plenty of examples of where you need the public interest, which is theoretically what the government represents.
Or what it should,
And you find this on the frontier of science. It's like,
well, yeah, NASA is a good example.
NASA's a great example of like, you know, a government is something that's willing to spend money on the frontier of science, even though there's no guarantee in payback.
Yeah.
Whereas a business like SpaceX can only be a business because space travel's already been figured out to a level where, sure, it fails sometimes.
But this is why it's really unique. This is why, and this is what frustrates me so much about the left-right dichotomy and just like headbutting, is the fact that NASA and SpaceX are a perfect example. What SpaceX does, they do way better than NASA ever could.
And that's fine.
And
it's great that SpaceX can exist in our country.
And what NASA does well
is
they do better than a private entity could do. But
a private entity couldn't do it. Who's going to invest
exactly?
In
but what NASA is also trying to do, because they're also trying to compete with like SpaceX in some senses of trying to make a manned.
Well, I mean, they pay SpaceX. They use them. You know?
But they're also trying to build their own shit, and like they should not be doing that. It's just a waste. It's a jobs project. That's a whole other episode, though.
Yeah,
it's a whole.
I mean, I'm not saying that like just because NASA in concept is good doesn't mean there's not ways that they might waste money, right?
No, there's ways that they could be way more efficient, but they're vital to. They're still vital,
and also at the same
even though they don't do everything well or perfect or ideal, they're still vital.
And at the same time, they're like half a penny on the tax dollar.
Oh yeah,
which means like of 100% of our spending, they're half of 1%.
That's got to be next episode.
I mean, even anything with like environment, and you know, I have to be honest. Like, we could have done a whole episode on like the whole Trump administration EPA. And
well, that's a huge part of it. On
so much of level, the politics surrounding like Trump, especially when it's concerned with science, like which
Luke, you cut 2 regulations for every new one.
It's
that's a fact, Luke.
It's weird. I know for a lot of people, like Trump getting elected, kind of engaged them in politics more.
Yeah.
And for me, it sort of made me take a step back and just say, like, I'm so disinterested in the level of conversations that are going on with politics.
But aren't you interested in trying to engage more on a level that is
I'm trying to speak on a more zoomed out level.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
In other words, I don't have the energy to get into the details. Let's say the details are like in this sphere. There's a sphere back where you can talk about like, what does it mean to be a conservative?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a liberal?
Yeah.
And kind of talk about that dichotomy without getting lost in the weeds of like, what do you think about gender pronouns? What do you think about like this? What do you think about this? What do you think of? And there's so much noise there. It's impossible to like figure out what's going on. And it's like global warming. It's like that should be easy. We all have to live on this earth, and we can't even agree on what reality is there.
Well, that should be the primary. The fact that global climate change isn't the focus or isn't the main
or is not a uniting thing.
Oh my god.
Sadly, what's one way?
terrifying.
Like, think of the most obvious way that you can get all Americans to unite behind each other.
War.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and a lot of money is spent on that. A lot more money than
When
on
9/11
conservation.
happened, there was a sense of unity
Yeah.
and togetherness, and
Probably of which I have not seen
it was
elsewhere in my
palpable.
lifetime. Yeah.
I was young. I was in 6th grade.
Yeah.
And it was palpable. I could feel a certain energy that
Well, that was an issue where it didn't matter if you were Democrat. It didn't matter if you were Republican. Everybody was on the same fucking page, right?
Yeah.
So to your point, global climate change, like I think it's, and again, I come back to what that professor said, which was, here are the facts. I'm going to let you come to the conclusions of what we should do about it, but you should know the information. And I think that's huge if you can relate that information. So maybe that's something we should include in the description. Actual fucking factual studies that show that, yes, the climate is changing, number one. Let's start there. Let's agree on that. 2, humans are impacting it to some degree.
an unknown degree, but to some degree, and probably a high degree,
And then
But
that we can
admittedly
debate. Yeah.
unknown.
Yeah.
And even
Well-
if we could admit that, we could admit that, like, hey, like in other words, it's so interesting when you're having a disagreement with somebody. You want to say, where is our disagreement? In other words, do you disagree that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas?
Yeah.
Do you disagree with science in general? Like Candace Owens on this Joe Rogan podcast where she was arguing about global warming. You know what really turned me off, which is why I haven't followed her since?
What?
In this world, there are so many people to follow and so many ways to follow them.
Yeah.
And the kind of people that I have kept with over a long period of time are the people that have established a trust with me.
Yeah.
And the people
I
that
hear that.
don't establish a trust are people that can't say the phrase, I don't know.
Mm.
And what she should have said is, I actually don't have an opinion on this. But what she did say was, I don't really have an opinion on this, but I think it's not real. It's like, you're saying you have an opinion on it then.
Yeah.
And so
Or
like, I
what's
just lost.
worse than that is that they'll say, because I've seen this too, I don't know in her case, but certainly in other cases where they say, I just feel that, and then they give their explanation, and then they defend it as if it's fact. And it's like,
Right,
you just said you feel, which means you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
right. And
That's what really bothers me in those types of arguments.
it kind of depressed me with
And
her
not
because
that you can feel what you want, but you can't then defend it like it's fact.
I mean, I feel a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
I wake up some mornings, I feel cranky. It doesn't mean much. It's just
I
a
feel
feeling.
like my butt itches, so I scratch it. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean anything.
If
I
I'm
just
in my
scratch it.
frog suit and I have to take a big running dump, I just do it. So the thing that depressed me about her was when she first entered the scene, I thought it could be like a hopeful balancing act where like a reasonable conservative who's a woman who's black could like kind of jar the system a little bit.
Yeah, break
And
some ground in some ways.
Unfortunately, I think she's not a bad person, right? Like I hate the idea of ad hominem attacks. Like
Yeah, I
just
don't
think,
like to qualify people as
she
good or bad in that
revealed
sense,
she
yeah.
revealed to me that her thinking isn't as thorough and complex as I thought it was. Now we all have weak spots and blind spots,
Yeah.
but one of the things that I try to do is if you're asking me a question about something I don't really know much, which includes global warming, right? Like if you started grilling me about global warming, I would get to a point where I would plant a flag and say, I actually don't know more than this.
Yeah.
I know why I think I know more than this because I've been told a lot of
Yeah.
things and it sounds like it could be true.
Yeah.
But like you said, have you gone through the data?
Yeah.
Have you checked how that data is collected and why it's considered good data
Yeah.
versus bad data? Like,
Yeah.
do you know the processes that they
If
process it with?
if it's any consolation, I have done that, and it is good data. And the people who are smart, like what's scary is that they're the people who argue with you, who get you to that point. They'll start saying all this shit about other studies. They'll start citing them. They're smart enough to know what studies contradict that data.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that they're right.
Right. It's the same with GMO. Like people will cite like,
Sure,
oh, this
yeah.
one study showed
Another-
rats get cancer. It's like, yeah, because
Another great example.
they got
yeah.
like that's one
Yeah.
study, but what about the other 100? You know?
Yeah, or like, are you looking at one factor within that study, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you watch CNN or Fox or whatever your news digestion and you see like a 3-minute segment, does that mean you know anything?
You should probably be listening to us for your news.
Yes.
I
Thank you, Joe.
I think that's the important closing note here.
Now that I'm off camera.
Oh yeah, the camera's syncing. Do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. I would say
part one.
so this kind of took more of like I just find it fascinating how things get a political spin to them, and how things, if you really want to talk about them and have real conversations, they shouldn't be political. And I also love the idea that this might turn into a whole episode. I think I might order a book, and I'll let you know if I can turn it into an episode concept, so to speak. But it's the idea that we shouldn't really have an opinion on almost anything, most people, including us. I mean, because there are very limited domains that you are actually an expert in.
Yeah. Well,
and other than that, you're a blind person feeling around in the dark.
Well, I think you should be allowed to have an opinion on things, but you shouldn't be married to those opinions, right?
But you should also know that, like in other words, like I was just trying to say that even though I would consider my opinion about climate change to be pretty strong, if I were being attacked by an extremely competent person who was just trying to play devil's advocate and was very good at it, I could be shown that I have just as much faith in my opinion, because it's not like I spent years, I'm up here with my confidence level, but I didn't build the structure all the way down with data and
let me
experience.
Ask you this just very briefly. Have you looked at climate change data from like the national, whatever, like the NOAA or something like that?
I mean, roughly, yes, right?
All right, so do you trust what they say?
Where is most of the strength of my opinion coming from is the people I've learned to trust who do more work in that area.
But you trust them for what reasons?
Some of them are personal reasons, meaning the very thing I was trying to say before, which is that you get a read on how somebody delivers information. Yeah. So, for example, this is the problem I have. I mean, I don't want to say just with the left, but I see so many people on the left when they're saying a quote-unquote opinion, they almost seem to be performing a virtue signaling character. Yeah. And that's a deal breaker for me, because I think to myself, you might be right, but if I'm going to check up on you, it's going to take me 3 hours, and I don't have that time right now.
I don't have the time to come
So
back
I'm just going to turn you off, and I'm going to keep that category in my mind as an unknown.
Yeah.
It's like I would love to be confident about what you were talking about, but I can't use what you told me. Yeah. Whereas if Neil deGrasse Tyson's talking about some kind of lake on Mars, one, I have no reason to believe that he would be misrepresenting the data.
Yeah.
Two, everything I've heard from him, I've detected, maybe a bias here or there about certain things. Like people have called him out for having some bias against like the philosophy, but that's a whole nother thing. In other words, like everybody has their biases, but like if he's talking about like the lake on Mars, he's probably not just lying to me for some political reason,
right?
Or lying to himself, or wanting to lie to himself. So
or whatever iteration.
So much of that is just like the way you read people and whether you think, and.
Yeah, so I think we've proven that global climate change is clearly a hoax perpetuated by China.
And as usual, folks, our episodes are usually just a little, use an idea to just spark the excuse to have a random conversation.
I mean, you're in a fucking frog suit. So.
I'm in a frog suit, and my face is now off the YouTube video because the camera we taped to the wall is now slowly falling. But don't worry, in part 2, we'll prop it back up.
We'll prop it right back up.
So join us in part 2. We're going to get into like the specifics of plastics for pollution. And Joe's been doing this like beach cleaning thing. And
I'm in deep, baby.
And most importantly, theoretically, Johnny will be joining us. So
I really hope. That's all I want for Christmas in July at this point.
Half Christmas,
baby. So
coming up.
We'll see you at Half Christmas dinner.
Thanks for tuning back in. Sorry it's been so long, for an episode. We'll try to get this one out ASAP, and then part 2 we'll probably get out.
Now. We'll do it right now. We'll do it live.
Let's post it. We're going to post it right now.
Do you want it?
I mean, it'll take like 10 minutes, but...
All right, I'll get the
All right, and bye.
Yeah, okay. End stream. Oh, shit. Didn't mean to do that. So we had one viewer